Evgeny Kuznetsov. Should he stay? Should he go? We'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the elephant in the room. And that elephant I speak of is Evgeny Kuznetsov. What do the Capitals do with Evgeny Kuznetsov? It's been said that he wants out of DC. When questioned about it, he said, no comment. I've never said that. So why did the Russian media ultimately say it? And should the Capitals let him out of his contract? And then we'll talk about potential teams he could go to if he is traded. In the event that all of a sudden Brian McClellan's like, you know what, Evgeny Kuznetsov, I'm going to honor your wish. We're going to trade you out of here. What would some of those landing spots be? Then later we will talk about what kind of player is Evgeny Kuznetsov. Suffices to say he didn't have a great season last season, but historically, what kind of player is he? And does he ultimately deserve another chance on this team after what he has said? And that's where we'll start today is Evgeny Kuznetsov. He was in the top 3 in goals just a couple seasons ago. And already Caps fans are already saying, let's get him out of here. And he's even said that he wants out of here. I think that is ultimately what it's all about there, is that he has expressed his displeasure of being here. And I think a lot of Caps fans, and myself included, say, if you don't want to be here, the door's right over there. See yourself out. Thank you for your contributions to this team. But the plot twist of all plot twists is that Peter Laviolette is no longer the head coach of the Capitals. There is a new deputy in town, and his name is Spencer Carbery. Could he be the head coach to squeeze more out of Evgeny Kuznetsov? Could he refocus his game a little bit to get him to be that top 3 goal scorer that he was just a couple of years ago? That is a good question. Ultimately, for me, if Evgeny Kuznetsov changes his tune and, he said, I'm willing to work with this next head coach, I say, let's give him another opportunity, despite the fact that he's a bit quirky, I guess you could say. And he has often said that, I could be the greatest player in the NHL if I really wanted to be. I just don't really want to apply myself that much all the time. That is an interesting thing. And those are some of the things that I've heard about Evgeny Kuznetsov, as he's often said that I could be one of the best. I just, I don't want to commit and I don't want to play that hard all the time. It's an interesting, stance to take, being that you're playing in the National Hockey League. So, but just taking a look back on him, historically and what kind of player he is. 5 years ago, they took out the Vegas Golden Knights to win the first Stanley Cup in team history. This season, they put up 80 points, missed the playoffs for the first time since 2006. Times change in players' age or need a change of scenery. Evgeny Kuznetsov, a key member of the Stanley Cup team, might be one of those players the Capitals can trade to keep their dream alive. And we'll talk about where that could potentially be. The 31-year-old has 2 years left on his contract with $7.8 million cap hit. He's piled up 551 points in 10 NHL season. He has a dynamic playmaking ability, highlight reel talent, and one of the most controversial moves on the shootout out there. And if you guys haven't seen it, he comes up to the net real slow and back and forth and drives it home. It is a very unique shootout shot that he has there. But I mean, we cannot keep Evgeny Kuznetsov on this team for that reason alone. So Does he deserve another opportunity on the Capitals? Again, as I record this in June, I think he deserves another opportunity unless there is always a caveat in everything is if they get a really good offer on him. So say, a team makes a crazy offer, but based on the dollar amount, I don't think that's going to happen. But in the unforeseen circumstance that that does happen, then of course I would be willing to entertain it. But, kind of my stance with Evgeny Kuznetsov is the same that it is with any other player. I don't want to make change for change's sake. If the Capitals can upgrade from Kuznetsov, maybe they get a couple players and prospects or whatever the case may be, then I'm all about it. But I don't think they should ship him out of here just because he has had kind of a bad attitude and maybe didn't have his best season last season. So that's my stance on Evgeny Kuznetsov. I think that he is worth, getting another long look and seeing what he can do under Spencer Carbery. I will say that if he does not have better results this next season under a new head coach, Spencer Carbery, who on paper seems to be a really great head coach, then I think you would definitely want to explore options. But the difficult thing, like I talked about, is his contract. He does make a lot of money, and ultimately who is going to want to take on that kind of contract. Kuznetsov 7.8 million cap hit accounts for almost 10% of the Caps payroll. So, we do have a lot of money tied up in him, and just base, like I said, everyone else can see the back of his hockey card. They know what kind of player he is. It's not like, the GMs of other teams have blinders on and headphones on and they can't see or hear what's going on. They know what kind of player he is. Of course, there's always some team out there that says, the Caps just aren't utilizing him the right way. Bring him over here and we'll get him in top form. And, they've had mixed results with that. You've seen players that have left this team to go on and kill it. Chandler Stevenson and the myriad of different goalies that have left this team to, a change of zip code and scenery has just been what the doctor ordered. But for me, as a Caps fan, a fan of Kuznetsov at the end of the day, I just think that he was a little miffed. I don't think that he necessarily had good chemistry with head coach Peter Laviolette. I think that he reveres himself as still a top line player. If I'm not playing on the first line or second line, then I'm going to pitch a fit. And I think that that is, ultimately what made him mad. And I kind of know that's what it is, because that is when we started to hear of his displeasure and talking about him wanting to leave this team. Many people will say, well, he never said it. But the interesting thing for me is that when questioned, he didn't deny it. If I had made some outrageous claim and someone asked me about it, I would say, I never said it. I never said that. But when he was questioned about it, it was kind of no comment. So an interesting thing, I guess, it doesn't really matter if he said that he wanted out of town. Oftentimes people say things when they're upset that they regret later in life. You know that if you're in a relationship with someone else, or maybe you took it out on someone and after the fact, you're like, hey, I'm sorry, I was just a little bit upset. Sometimes that can be the case. Is that the case with Kuznetsov? Was he just a little miffed on where he was integrated into the Capitals lineup with Peter Laviolette at the helm? If that is the case, then maybe a new head coach could be just what the doctor ordered. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about intrinsically what kind of player is Evgeny Kuznetsov. Is he even worth the risk? We'll talk about that straight ahead. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can get a no sweat bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to fanduel.com/locked on to join today. And sometimes, when you're watching these games, it's not that exciting. But if you have a little money on the game, it can make it that much more exciting. So don't miss your chance to snag a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Go to fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. So welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. I have a lot of great guests lined up for you this summer. Most notably, John Walton will be on the show. at the conclusion of the push for the cup there, the Calder Cup there, whenever that may be, I'm going to get him on the show here. Not to mention that I got you guys covered with a draft and free agency. So make sure and sign up to Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Evgeny Kuznetsov. What kind of player is he ultimately? And is he even worth all of this mess ultimately? Like I spoke about on the top here, I think that he is ultimately a pretty good player, all things considered. But is he worth the risk? Should they try to bring him back, being that he is kind of, a guy that's prone to being, getting his feelings hurt? Part of the appeal of keeping Nick Backstrom around amid the 35-year-old's health problems is the familiarity with Alex Ovechkin, who is chasing the all-time scoring record. Kuznetsov would likely fall into that category after 10 seasons in Washington, while as of January 23rd, he collected the third most assists all time on Ovechkin goals. This piece in Washington Hockey Now. So, I mean, it's not like this is a guy that does not have a skill set. It's not like they're keeping around a guy just for no reason. Evgeny Kuznetsov is a good player when he wants to be. The difficult part, however, is that one part there when he wants to be. We need a player. If you're going to get a sweater night in and night out in the National Hockey League, you better bring it every single night. And if you don't, there are players down in Hershey chomping at the bit, just waiting for their opportunity. See Connor McMichael, Hendrix Lapierre, Ethan Frank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They want their opportunity, and they got to be looking at a guy like Kuznetsov and saying, why are you squandering your opportunity? We want to play. If you don't want to play, then sit down, put me in. I will help perform. And I have no doubt in my mind that Connor McMichael could be that guy potentially. So that's the difficult thing. For me, Evgeny Kuznetsov better step up, or you're going to be the healthy scratch. And it's a tough thing based on the amount of money that he's getting paid. Ultimately, it would be better to get that contract off the books. But I'm just talking about the win column. We need to put in players that are going to give the Capitals the best chance of winning every single night. And if it's not him, say they can find a trade partner. I am kind of, opposed to the buyout thing. Then you're just paying a player a bunch of money and they're not even playing for you. I would hate to keep Kuznetsov on the team as a depth piece, but if he does not step up this next season, given the fact that there's going to be a new head coach, then it's going to be difficult. And, like I said, there are many players down in Hershey that are, waiting for their opportunity. And while Kuznetsov's 22-23 season was uncharacteristically unproductive, 12 goals and 43 assists in 81 games, he is only one season removed from a 78-point season across 79 games. He tallied 24 goals that season, which is the second highest total of his career, and could be a welcome presence with Backstrom surrounded by questions and TJ Oshie set to turn 37 in December. Again, this piece in Washington Hockey Now, they were talking about that, is and I've talked about it. Backstrom, I think we're at the point now, and TJ Oshie, at least some Caps fans are at the point of saying, maybe we held on to them too long. Maybe we should have traded them while they still have value. Because let's face it, Backstrom and TJ Oshie's value has been far diminished over, let's say, the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years, that they should have potentially, maybe decided to move them sooner. Evgeny Kuznetsov is a bit younger and has the potential of being that really great goal scorer. I don't think the Capitals should give up on a guy that has the potential of being a really great player. And just those stats that I said alone, 12 goals and 43 assists in 81 games. He is only one season removed from a 78-point season across 79 games, 24 goals that season. He has the potential of being a 20-plus goal scorer. We have seen it. And I remember before Kuznetsov came here, everyone was talking about Kuznetsov. When's he going to be here? And there was a lot of fanfare about it. And then when he was finally here, there was a bunch of excitement that surrounded it. And that's what kind of player you're getting. You're getting a dynamic player, but you're also getting kind of a quirky player as well. And you got to take the good and the bad with Evgeny Kuznetsov. You know that he's kind of an odd duck at the end of the day. And but if he can refocus, I don't really care what kind of duck he is. If we can get him focused in and being the player that we know he can be, then I think that the only great things will follow from Evgeny Kuznetsov. But that is my assessment right now, is that we should hold on to him like that. We'll give him one more shot just based on the potential of who he can be. And for me, I think he has the potential of being a really great player. He just has to want it. All right, so straight ahead, we will talk about potential teams he could go to, trade partners. Yeah, we're already talking about contingency plans. If he does want out of this team, where would he land? We'll talk about that when Locked On Capitals continues. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So in this final segment, we are going to talk about potential teams that he could go to in the event that he does get traded. If someone wants to take on that huge contract that he has, one of the teams that's an up and coming team. It's kind of been an up and coming team since they've been in the league, but the Arizona Coyotes, a team that lacks, let's say, a wealth of talent. It's obvious to pick teams tight to the cap ceiling to move big money players to Arizona in a trade. Of course, the obvious happens because there's truth surrounding the circumstances and the truths that make the Coyote Capitals partnership for Kuznetsov work out. The Coyotes have oodles of cap space and they have a desperate need for more talent at forward. So why did I pick the Coyotes, being that they're not just brimming over the top as a great opportunity for a trade partner? Let's face it, if the Capitals have to trade Kuznetsov, it's going to have to be at a loss. If they want to go down that avenue. Say that, again, like I said I don't want to make change for change's sake, but say Brian McClellan says, I don't want to lose Kuznetsov, the player, but he accounts for a lot of money in our payroll. I just want him out of town, whatever it takes, so it can free up space for me to get another player. Then I could see that being the case. Would Arizona be willing to do that and also not have to worry about salary retention? Take a look at what Coyotes roster looks like right now at capfriendly.com, and it'll be clear why they would make sense. It's even more important when you see their depth chart. Arizona's 2022 first-round pick, Logan Cooley, won't be around until 2024 at the earliest, and they'll need other players. They will need other talent. If there's a question that sticks out here, it's what would the Capitals want in return? Washington still has hopes of winning another Stanley Cup, and an injury sent their seasons into a tailspin this year. What Arizona can't exactly offer are the pieces needed to satisfy the Caps' needs for the immediate future that could also help them in years down the road. After all, the Coyotes are ways away from being a true contender, and the Caps window is closing on them, if not shut already. This piece was here in the Bleacher Report talking about it. So the Coyotes, for me, a good option if they are just looking to simply offload payroll, but the return, I don't know if the Coyotes have a lot that's going to interest the Capitals. I think at the end of the day, they would have to cherry pick players out of the organization and draft picks, that kind of thing. But that should only be done if they're just merely looking to get his contract off the books. Another team that is just, I think, going to be a whole lot different next season, just based on the draft and the fact that they are going to get Connor Bedard, is the Chicago Blackhawks. Could Evgeny Kuznetsov be a key piece in a Chicago Blackhawks team that is looking for a different look next season? Once the Blackhawks draft Connor Bedard in a couple of weeks in Nashville, it's not that long anymore, they'll have a megastar to build around. Seth Jones and Connor Murphy will be there on the defensive side, but apart from that, they don't have a lot to work with. And let's face it, this Blackhawks team last season wasn't that great. It's not like the team that we've seen historically with Taves and Kane. It is a team that is changing. Chicago does have a lot of draft picks to work with this year, 11, and much more salary cap space to play with, which makes them a perfect team to call on Kuznetsov. If I'm going to pick one, I do think that the Blackhawks do have some options. They also have draft picks that, if the Capitals are in the market for saying, hey, give us a bunch of draft picks and a couple depth pieces, it's a possibility, right? So I do think that the Chicago Blackhawks potentially could be that team. To give perspective on how things were for Chicago last season, Kuznetsov's 55 points would have led them in scoring. The team's top two scorers last season, Max Domi and Patrick Kane, were both traded by the deadline and still led the team in points. Yeah, the Blackhawks were good. And no matter how dynamic Bedard plays next season, they're still not going to be very good. I don't necessarily agree with that assessment. I do not think the Blackhawks are just going to put Connor Bedard in there and say, save us, Connor Bedard. No, they're going to build a team around him to make them a competitive team. I do believe that the Blackhawks will be competitive next season. They're not going to, like I say, they're not going to just say, Connor Bedard, go out there and make us win a cup. That's not how it's done. Kuznetsov isn't 100% cure-all to fix what the Blackhawks need, but he can bridge the gap and even establish himself as a veteran guide as part of what with a very young group. A mentor thing. I'm not sure if that's the case, given his quirky personality. The other team here is the Sharks. The Sharks who, have kind of lost their way as of late. Historically, gave the Caps fits, especially at the Shark Tank. For many years, they had a hard time winning games there. The Sharks are in an awkward space in their history. They're not a great team, and they should not be actively trying to rebuild, but they've got established star players like Erik Karlsson, Thomas Hertl, and Logan Couturier. They also have young talent such as William Eklund and Philip Bysted, but they're a team in transition. They're going to draft every good player with the fourth pick in this year's draft, but they need a lot more as soon as possible if they want to get close to a playoff race. Adding Kuznetsov to the mix won't fix all the issues they've got with their lineup, but it still gives them someone to use to better lift up the next wave of young stars. And if you're doing it for that reason, the Caps have young stars that they're looking to lift up. They want to be the next great team. We're spitballing here. We're prognosticating. We're throwing it against the wall and seeing if it sticks here. I'm talking about if the Capitals ultimately want to move Kuznetsov for some reason. Say they do. Someone offers him a ton of money. Crazier things have happened than these are potential teams and the Sharks. It is intriguing. It might seem odd to add a player like Kuznetsov to this group, but when the young talent isn't quite at the top level you need, and there aren't enough outstanding veteran players, adding another superb vet to the group gives everyone a lift. So those are some of the teams that I think Kuznetsov could go to in the event that they want to move him. Again, for me, to summarize this entire episode, to just summarize the whole thing and wrap it up in a bow, what I'm going to say is I think that they should give Evgeny Kuznetsov another opportunity under Spencer Carbery, just given the fact of the potential of what kind of player he is. Let's face it, he had an off season. A lot of players have off seasons. Unless he really digs his heels in and says, get me out of here, then I think we should give Kuznetsov another opportunity. I know everyone thinks that you're going to get the world for someone like Kuznetsov, but like I've spoke of on the show for the longest time, everyone else can see the back of his hockey card. They know what kind of player he is, that he's hot and cold. Let's face it. The Caps owe him a lot of money, and unless another team out there is willing to push the crazy button to bring Kuznetsov in, which I don't think is going to be the case, then I think that they're kind of stuck with him for now. As we know that there's years left on his contract. I think that once his contract is up, for sure, they should do something. But the tough thing is of course, why do you wait till their contract to get all the way to the end when you could trade him and get some value? If you wait to the very end, they walk out the door and you get a nothing. So that is my thought. Give him at least one more season under Spencer Carbery and see what kind of player he is. If they can find a way to refocus him, to make him into that player that we've seen flashes of, then I am all about it. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So no matter what fan of sports you are in DC, Locked On has got you covered. Also, Locked On NHL is going on as they talk about the pending draft and what players will land here and land there. Locked On NHL has you covered 5 days a week, available on your podcatcher of choice and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.